Some say good things come in small packages, or in this case, smaller package. And you know what? I could agree with that. Hi guys, Matthew here and welcome back again to my channel. Not long after Fractal released their new Define 7 series, which I actually reviewed recently, there's going to be a link to it in the right top corner. They obviously heard comments of some users out there wanting for something equally good build quality and feature wise, but in a smaller format, which subsequently resulted in what I'm going to talk about today, the brand new and just introduced Define 7 compact chassis. But before I go into detail about what's different compared to its bigger brother, let's first check out how it is to build in it. Is it exactly the same or should you expect any compromises? Well, I can say that it was any harder putting components in it than with doing the same in its, so to speak, full-sized version, but there are definitely some limitations, which is more than to be expected since the chassis is smaller by all counts, especially in length and width. Right away you can notice that because of the difference in length we don't have that front compartment which can be turned into a drive storage layout with using their multi-bracket plates. This is something which probably a lot of potential buyers of the original Define 7 series don't need, so it comes as a pretty reasonable compromise. This also defines a new maximal GPU length for the Define 7 Compact, which is now 360mm without and 341mm with the fan installed on the front, and compared to the regular Define 7, that's almost 130mm shorter in both cases. If you compare it to its predecessor, the Define C, it's a bit of a different story. The total supported maximal GPU length is around 20mm longer in both scenarios, with or without the front fan. On the other hand, the CPU cooler height is lower by 3mm, 169mm instead of 172mm, while with the Define 7 that's 185mm, but I don't think this will have any impact on the installation flexibility. Continuing on with the topic of putting stuff in the chassis, in regards of fan and radiator support, there's a decent amount of options on your disposal, very similar to the original Define 7. At the front you can put from 120 to 360mm radiators, with a 145mm limitation for maximal width for those radiator sizes using 140mm fans. On the top you can put up to 240mm radiator, so Define 7 Compact drops the 360mm radiator support here, which is not a surprise considering its stubby nature, while if you choose to put a 240mm radiator on the top, be sure to use low profile RAM with maximal height of 40mm because it will interfere with them. You can also put 120mm on the bottom and one on the back, while that on the bottom will require removing the drive cage. Of course, you can choose to put just fans on those two spots, one of which, the one on the back, comes pre-installed, and that's their dynamic X2 GP12 fan. Another dynamic X2 fan is also pre-installed on the front, but that one is the bigger 140mm GP14 version. Although we don't have that big storage skyscraper on the front, there is still a lot of other storage options at hand. We have a total of 4 dedicated 3.5-inch drive installation spots, 2 on the top hanging upside down using their multi-brackets, which unfortunately this time you won't get at all from the bundle, you'll have to buy them separately. Additional 2 come from the drive cage itself within the power supply shroud area, and if you decide to remove the cage completely, there's a single spot on the bottom that can be used without the need of a multi-bracket, just a couple of rubber grommets and screws. All of the 3.5-inch drive installation positions can of course take in 2.5-inch drives as well, while they also have their own dedicated spots, 2 on the back of the motherboard tray thanks to these handy brackets, and 2 on the power supply shroud, for which you will have to purchase separate 2.5-inch brackets. Moving outside for a bit, the design of the Define 7 Compact is completely the same compared to its bigger brother, only this one is more like a fun-sized version of it. If you didn't have any size reference, it would be pretty easy to mix them up. Since it's smaller in size, the front metal brushed panel doesn't sway open to reveal a big dust filter and 5.25-inch drive bay. You will still get some dust filters, but ones on the sides, similar to the Vector RS in which I did a build just recently, so you have to pull the panel off in order to remove them and then clean them. That's not a problem since it can be pulled off easily, while the bottom dust filter again minds its own business and can be taken off as you please, independent of anything else surrounding it. The top panel also follows the same theme of being held with a sort of like a quick release mechanism, so you can just pull it off in a matter of seconds and reveal another dust filter beneath it, all without obstructing the IOs on the top front. Speaking of them, just a quick glance over, with the Define 7 Compact you will be greeted by the same setup, so again a total of 5 USB ports, 4 of them USB Type A ports, 2 2.0 and 2 3.0 ports, together with 1 USB Type C 3.1 Gen 2 ports, next to the of course power on and reset switch, separate audio in and audio out 3.5mm jacks, and a bright power LED indicator. Back to the top panel, Fractal again provides with the bundle a mesh top panel as an alternative option, and this time I've decided to use this panel since I put Fractal's Celsius Plus S28 Prisma all-in-one water cooler at the front of the chassis, so I ended up transferring that 140mm front fan to the top to serve a purpose of being an exhaust fan. Both the left side tempered glass side panel, which by the way is once more that light tinted model, and the right side panel again have the same easy to release mechanism where you just pull this tab and the top side of the panel pops off, with the bottom part being hinged into the chassis frame. Removing them, we're getting back inside, so let's finally check out what's actually different here. Obviously it's a lot more claustrophobic, but the essentials are still present. We have your rubber grommets and cutouts all around the motherboard tray. As you can see, there's just enough room for them between the radiator and the right side edge of the motherboard, plus you could get away with a push-pull configuration without still interfering with the cables. On the back you can see that we have 7 expansion slots, while they removed the option of installing the GPU vertically. On the front part of the power supply shroud you can again see the plastic covers, which can be removed in case you plan to put a longer 360mm radiator, or if you want to pull out that drive cage, as you can only do that through this opening. Going behind the motherboard tray, on the bottom we have a dedicated space for the power supply, with rubber padding for it and a separate installation bracket. This time we have a little bit less of room for the power supply cables since the chassis is shorter, but still plenty enough for tucking them in, especially if you decide not to use the drive cage on the front. Moving towards the top, the most obvious change is the lack of the fan hub controller, which was a really handy add-on, but I guess they needed to make some sacrifices in order to bring the price down and make more room back here. The middle routing canal for the cables is now moved all the way to the left, but you will still get a lot of these holding brackets and velcro ties, as well as on the right side of the motherboard tray, plus plenty of other cable tie points for doing a clean cable management job, with more than this amount of space between the back of the motherboard tray and the right side panel, which again carries sound dampening material together with the front panel and the fully covered version of the top panel. Just be careful not to overlap the cables too much, then it can get a bit tight for the right side panel to fit on, since we now have a little bit less of empty space between it and the motherboard tray. Touching the topic of sound insulation, although I did use the mesh top panel with my initial temperature testing, I did try using the other panel just to see what's the difference in noise that it makes. Obviously everything is going to be by default quieter since there's one less fan on the top, but when you draw the line the difference was not that distinctive. Here's a short sound clip showing you all of those different scenarios and their noise profiles, while also showing you the sound meter for a measurement comparison. Coming down to the temperature testing, with both the CPU and GPU being under full load, although it was a different cooling setup in question, I saw figures very similar to my recent experience with the Define 7, granted it's a bit warmer now than usual. Being cooled off by a 280mm water cooler, the Ryzen 7 3700X was a bit cooler compared to Noctua's NHD15 Chromax Air CPU cooler, which I used back then, while Sapphire's RX 5600 XT Pulse model was just a tad warmer, which is not a surprise as warm air from the radiator blows directly over it. Fractal once again proved with the Define 7 Compact that they did a solid job on their front panels when it comes to these cutouts dedicated for airflow and bringing in the cold air, despite having a solid front, while similar solutions can be seen on a couple of their other models. So, if the Define 7 Compact is a smaller and a bit less capable version of its original brother, the price should be lower, shouldn't it? And yes, this time that assumption is a correct one. The original MSRP for the tempered glass version of the Define 7 was, or better yet is, $170, while the price for the new Define 7 Compact carrying also the tempered glass side panel is set at $110. That's a pretty substantial difference, which will make this series even more interesting to users who already set their eyes on the regular model but didn't need that much flexibility in terms of the storage options and other added features, but they were rather just in search for a minimalistic looking, well built and well thought out chassis for a reasonable amount of money considering what it is. That's it for this time from me. Thank you once again for watching. Please take a second and toss me a thumbs up if you enjoyed my content, that really helps a lot. And if you like what you saw, feel free to subscribe, and if you already are, be sure to press that notification bell down below so you don't miss out on a new video. And until then, catch you later guys.